Hello, soul seekers. So, me and Peter are here today to talk to you a little bit about our experience with past life regression as facilitators, and also sharing with you that we will be doing trainings on how to get yourself certified and learn all the intricate details and skills necessary to be able to carry out a successful past life regression for those who you'll be guiding. So Peter, if you want to just kind of go into a little bit of your experience with being a facilitator.
Yes, one of the most amazing things about past life regression undoubtedly is that you travel, you're a time machine. You're going with people through history, and these experiences are so real.
Yeah.
Or you can't make this stuff up. I mean, because when you do enough of these past life regressions, what you're going to be noticing is there is a consistency in the experiences of people. Like when you go back to, let's say, 10, 15 different Native American lives, right?
Yeah.
You will find there's consistencies, and also the way people approach these sessions, when they experience these sessions. For example, they are not telling you a history lesson about their time as a Native American. They are, at that moment, a Native American. They are living in the tribe, and you're getting a tunnel vision of that moment, how they experienced it. But it's consistent, isn't it? It's consistent with all the people. And then you have people going in the Wild West. We have a lot of Wild West because being predominantly in America where we work, you have a lot of people being born in the Wild West, right?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting how souls tend to kind of trend into cultures for a little while because there's an attachment formed to a certain culture. And so being reborn at least several lifetimes till they really get the full experience of that culture and being in that location on the planet.
Yes, for example, when we work with European clients, you will find that they will be having several lifetimes in Europe. I mean, I've gone back to the time of Mozart.
Like yourself.
And like myself.
As a Dutchman.
Yeah, I never had like past lives in the United States, for example. But I have them in Holland, I had them in all over France, I had them in different countries in Europe. And then I also had several lifetimes in the East, in India, and so on and so forth. And then when we work with Southeast Asians, we have people's lives describing them in China.
Different parts of Asia.
Different parts of Asia. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, it doesn't, of course, 100% apply because we do cross over the different areas. But I like to tell you, you're always interested in a good case and why past life regression can be so powerful.
Beneficial, absolutely.
Because me and Jenna, we see a lot of families or couples together. In our particular property here in Roanoke, Virginia, we have multiple offices. So we can see two people at the same time. Sometimes groups come or a family. And we were working with this whole family, right? That one by one we were working on. And they had suffered great loss.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful family, very accomplished, very deep, spiritual.
Very connected to each other.
And they're trying to deal with grief. But during the session, something very different came out. It wasn't so much about the grief
of the person who had passed.
Yeah. It turns out that it had to do a lot about the son that remained.
Yeah.
And the father was a very successful, very
well-to-do
developer of some kind. And the mom also was very sophisticated. And the son was kind of, having experienced loss of his brother, but also, being at the age where he was seeking his identity. And then his father, of course, hoping that he would follow into the business, and he had absolutely no interest in it. There was a lot of confusion about identity, about future, about purpose. And nobody quite understood why this boy actually ended up smoking a lot of marijuana in this whole kind of situation. And that was a problem for the family because, then he wasn't really motivated, he wasn't really going anywhere, and they're trying to deal with grief, and they thought it was predominantly about the grief, understandably. But what happened was, you saw the father,
Yeah.
and one of us, I think I saw the mother, and then I saw the son, and it turns out that the son, in a past life, was actually a king. And it's actually in our book, When Souls Transition, right?
Yeah.
And he had been a king, and he was very highly sophisticated as a king. He was very studious. His first opening scene was in a library surrounded by books. And what was also unique about this case was that he was also very meditative.
He's spiritually gifted.
He was in that lifetime very spiritually gifted. And he would actually meditate, and he would be able to attain high states of consciousness. Yeah. And eventually he was captured by an opposing group of people, another town or whatever. It was a small little kingdom. And he was captured, thrown into jail. And even in jail, he was able to get out of his body in meditation and reach for his past wife and his, connect to high states of well-being. And eventually he was beheaded. He was killed. And it turns out when we went, through this post-processing of the past life regression that happens during the session, it turns out that he realized that, I've been there, I've done that. I've been in powerful positions. I've been in elevated positions of prestige, of power. And I don't want to do that again. I don't want to do that again because the consequence in this case was like death. And besides, he has satisfied that need. And we came to the conclusion and the understanding that in this life, that was not his purpose. Yeah. His purpose was to continue his spiritual journey. But because of the expectations of society, the responsibility of his father's company, that pressure was put upon him, and he kind of imploded. And he started smoking marijuana. You can look at it metaphorically as a smokescreen between him and the world that he didn't want anymore. He wanted God. He wanted higher consciousness. And this kid that we were working with was, 20, 21 years old or something like that? 20s, yeah. And so, you see, the conclusion and the understanding we gained from this past life experience was tremendous. And Jenna, simultaneously, you worked with the father and, you were able to find out important things about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And how it wasn't so much about the passing of the other son as to use this experience to pull the family back together much deeper, on a much deeper level, and to really understand that, like, their history of their souls and what they had all been through, and that this was just this time around, that this had to happen in this certain way for them to come closer together and really get to know each other on another level that they weren't accessing before.
It was a transition of pursuing the world for its own sake to basically have him take the lead into spiritualizing their whole family and bringing them together. And it was a way also to deal with the grief, but more than that, it was bigger than that.
Well, grief is a doorway to your inner self and your inner world. And grief can be dealt with in two ways. It can either kind of cause you to shut down and go into a deep depression and really kind of push yourself away from the world, or it can rip you open, and it can open you up and make you very raw. And in that experience, if you spiritualize it and really go to the depth of what that grief is trying to teach you, then you will actually be able to connect and access that person who passed. It's like a gateway. And it's a portal so that you can actually reconnect with them on a higher level, because now they're on a higher frequency, but you're still trying to connect with them from this physical plane, and they're trying to connect with you from the astral plane. And so that grief actually helps us to take away the weight of the physical.
When you think about you have done hundreds of past life regressions, when you think about the most important aspect of your past life regression experiences as a facilitator, what would you say is the one thing that is I mean, both for you as a therapist, but also for the client, what is the
Mhm.
greatest takeaway? I mean,
To
if you,
realize that you are not just this one limited life, that you're not just this one person and this one body, but that you are a interdimensional being. You're a cosmic citizen having this physical bodily experience, and that your soul has a history, and it's got all these different characters and personalities and experiences, and that you can actually draw from that well of experience of these past lives, because you haven't just been living under a rock. You're experiencing life, and experiencing life brings teachings and wisdom. And so you're able to tap into the wisdom and experience of your past lives and bring that into the present. So you're
integration, you would say, is the big keyword.
Yes, integration is absolutely the major key
because you
player.
may think, right, when you go back in time, when you think, okay, so my past life must have been less evolved as now, but that's not necessarily always the case. Yes, you would say there is a progression, but we find often that people have unique and incredible experiences in certain, past lives, and that they need to remember what those were like. Like when you live as a Native American with a tribe in a forest, that is not a life that is less elevated than our life today. We could argue the opposite. And so sometimes we go back to those lives to remember.
Well, you're remembering the more simple impurity of life itself, the connection with nature and the elements, and understanding the presence of being, versus, now our problem is our senses are so highly captivated all the time. We never have the opportunity to be present and to be experiencing the moment as it is in its purest form. Where in our past, that's why I think people have such a strong draw to different eras and different times, because even people who love antiquing or going and visiting ghost towns or visiting old churches or historical places, because what it does is it triggers a memory of more of a time when things were present. Now, it's not that time, life wasn't harder. It was definitely harder, but there was more moments of just sitting and sitting on the porch and just watching the storm roll in.
They're more present. That's the word you used. Yeah, they were more present.
Cultivating in your garden and being present with the earth and the elements and all of that. Whereas now technology has kind of taken over, so it's a different playing field that we're on right now.
So by integrating these experiences into the now, we become more conscious, more aware of our greater purpose. So that's why past life regression is super important, to heighten our awareness and become more aware of our journey.
You realize that you're a soul inhabiting a body, and that you're not just this body and brain, that you are the consciousness behind it, and that consciousness is able to tune into the present moment and the environment that you're in.
Right, and also that this environment you're in right now is not your permanent home. That this is a set of circumstances in this particular training program.
So it really helps with detachment in a healthy way, not an unhealthy detachment, but a elevating detachment, in that you're seeing things from a bigger picture. You're seeing things from the observation of a soul witnessing these individual lives, and what was the theme, the characteristics, the teachings and lessons of all these lives. And so you're really able to capture all of it and bring it into the present and start to piece it together like a puzzle.
And that's why past life regression is such an important prerequisite for a life between life regression. Now, our training will prepare you for a life between life regression that you can become certified in the Newton Institute. But, it's like two wings of the same bird. Like, first you need to have that data, what you're talking about, that perspective, looking backwards to become aware of your theme. But the life between life then will give you the capacity to look forward. Okay, well, where is this all going?
Yeah, the past life regression will really give perspective and also meaning and understanding to certain things that we're going through, certain relationships, why we're in certain relationships, and what is our history with that, what is meant to be learned from the experience of the relationship, or an addiction, or, you know, so many things that could be drawn from a past life that's reoccurring in this life.
Even physical issues, right? I mean, I have my own story of my, you know, I'll tell you quickly about the fact that when I was younger, I always had throat pain, like continuously, and so many surgeries. I had lasers put in my throat and smoke coming out through my nose and my own burnt flesh, tonsils taken out. And it was just inexplicable how I had such throat issues all the time. And then one day we met this healer, and he started, you know, rubbing my throat real hard. And he says, "Oh, you know, you got some throat issues, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he started rubbing, and suddenly he said, "You see it? You see it?" And first I didn't see anything, but then suddenly I saw it. I saw, like he did, that I was on this East India ship, like a Dutch ship in the 1600s or something. And we were being attacked by another ship, and bullets were flying and swords. And this healer was telling me, "You see the bullets and the swords?" And I saw it right there with my eyes open. They were being attacked, and eventually my throat was being cut. And I was still carrying centuries later this trauma, and we can go back through regression to heal and release,
which you did. And I was witnessing it. I was there in the corner watching, and he just cried out, like it was just the most biggest emotional release I've ever seen. He doesn't express that much, and it was unbelievable to see that. And it was definitely different afterwards.
But we have seen it a lot in past life regressions too, where we were able to get to
tremendous
the source of some of these events that people didn't even know they were carrying over from lifetimes ago. Now, it doesn't mean that every past life regression you will have such a healing, but we have definitely seen it enough to know that
it creates also a sense of self-compassion.
Right.
You know, that you've been through a lot, your soul's been through a lot, and that you can really, you know, have some self-compassion for your own soul's journey, and that changes things as well.
And also that some of these things, these traumas, don't always have to necessarily be a negative experience. Somebody could it happened to me last week, when somebody was carrying a trauma in the body that was centuries old, but it wasn't because it was just a freak accident. Somebody fell down and broke the neck, and that neck was broken in such an awkward way that the person really died in a very weird way and painful way. And even now, centuries later, and we were able during the session to discover it and also to release it. So it was very powerful. Anyhow, just without going endlessly into stories, we also like to share with you a little bit about the facilitating, like what
aspect, what it's like to be a facilitator, and what it kind of is required in order to be able to successfully, you know, guide somebody through a past life regression where they can actually get some beneficial information about that.
What do you think is the first important, you know, thing we need to be aware of?
Connection and being open, present, and intuitive, and leading from your heart. So really being able to be a facilitator, you're really holding a safe space without judgment. You don't bring your own stuff into the session. You are there creating a safe container for them to go on this journey with you. And so you're going on the journey with them. And so they want to be able to trust you and feel safe with you. And so that being able to create rapport and connection and really empathize with them is important.
How is that difficult for a new therapist? Because they will want to hang on to technique and to...
So generally you kind of start out with just some, you generally as a therapist, you yourself need to go through the experience and be the client a few times. And then you can kind of know what it's like from the other side. and what is required to help you maybe get through certain things that might come up. And so you're able to navigate in a very fluid, heartfelt way and not feel that you have to be married to a script. Now, scripts are there because they work.
That's the basic technique of these.
Yeah, you definitely want to have a framework because,
Right.
it's not just a complete random thing. There's some framework and structure involved in facilitating. But within that framework, you need to be able to intuitively tune in from the heart and connect to that soul. And so you yourself need to be able to get up into that elevated space, into that pure conscious space. And so that, as a facilitator, you have to kind of be what you want your client to be able to experience yourself.
Right. I think also a very important point is that because of past-life regression, if you read the books, for example, you read our book, When Souls Awaken or When Souls Transition, you may get the impression that, that's each chapter is relatively short, but actually it's a huge process that takes hours. And we go through a lot of different stages during a session that we do not put in the book, right? Because, for example, in Souls Transition, we only take those parts where the past life begins. Mm-hmm. But there's a whole thing before that, because what we need to do as facilitator, we need to slowly get somebody to this past life. And so they go through different identities, because the first step is that we take them back to the childhood. And so as a therapist, you're going to have to facilitate somebody going through the childhood and being there, holding space for them, to tune in to them as a child. And that's a very particular personality, different from who they are now. And you have to be able to empathize, to sympathize, also therapeutically be present.
And there's a balance between leading and following and just being present and creating space, so that you're not afraid of silence, because silence can be a very powerful opportunity to go deeper. And so you're not continuously filling in, that empty silence where that person might be having an internalized experience that they can't vocalize yet. And
right.
So,
that's the whole point about these identities,
yeah, so
right?
things slow down a little bit, and it's not going to be a normal pace per se of conversation that like what we're having in beta, because that person is going to be an alpha theta brainwave frequency when they're in hypnosis. And so you have to be able to match that with your energy and your attention, that you're not ahead of them.
And it's not just matching,
dragging them somewhere.
Well, it's also that, when they go through a childhood regression, then the next stage, they're going into a womb regression. Yeah. Now they are connected as a little body, connected to the mother. And now you're getting a whole different dynamic. Now you're going to have the dynamic, what they have with the mother. And there is still, of course, a partial consciousness of their current situation with their mother. And as well,
it could be emotional,
because they are not actually entering into the womb and be there permanently. The soul actually may go in and out of the womb,
as it's integrating.
It may only stay there at the last moment, maybe the 8th month or something. And so you're going to have to become aware of that identity as a soul at this moment. Also, you have to be sensitive to the relationship, the identity it has as a child towards the mother. And so now it gets really, interesting. And as a therapist, it's really important to understand these differences. Okay, who's talking? Is a child now talking as a soul that is coming in and out of the womb and is still very much aware of its spirit identity? Or is it now talking as a child, as an embryo, basically with the new body? Or is it very much thinking ahead at its time, as in my relationship with my mother, how it's going to be, because they have a kind of a foresight. So, you have to switch back and forth. Yeah. And then finally, you get into the past life. There's going to be a complete different identity, and you find often people completely changing. I've seen people almost like changing their faces.
The energy, their entire energy will change to reflect what that energy of the soul's experience before is coming through. So it's, yeah, you definitely need to be able to stay attentive and stay with them and not drift off in your own mind and your own thoughts. You have to really be present with them. And so
and not be too academic,
it
because
requires
right?
a lot of patience.
What's the difference between, you can say, somebody who's very academic and very
cerebral,
even as a PhD in psychotherapy,
intellect,
and highly educated, highly sophisticated. However, this work is nevertheless a little bit different, right? So how would you, what would be a requirement of an LBL therapist to do this successfully?
Emotional sensitivity is a great asset to have when you do this kind of work. If you're an empath, if you're already doing healing work, you're a therapist, and even people who do Reiki, massage therapy, you're people who tune in to that person you're with, and there's this nurturing aspect of what you're doing. But really, I mean, anyone can learn it. It's a skill. It's it's technique. But then, there is also the intentional energy behind it. But it's a beautiful way to grow your spiritual self in that it does require you to meditate more, to look after what you're watching, eating, exposing yourself to, that you're not bringing that energy, negative energy, into the session, that you really become a conduit for pure positive, spiritual energy to be a facilitator. So it does
that's important, right?
require you to,
it's not about you, it's about the client.
It's not about you.
That's right. So to be able to pull yourself away and
from yourself,
and then going through all these different identity of the client. If you're full of complexity yourself, and then you're not able to step away from your own problems, and that's why it's a great spiritual practice.
Well, that's why even as a yoga therapist, that we, spend years going through our own practices of purification and working on emotional traumas, physical traumas, all these things, so that we can, become a conduit for other people now to provide that same thing that we ourselves have already gone through, that we've been through it ourselves. We know, we can relate to what people's experiences are. And so it's important to be willing to be open to do the work yourself in order to be a good facilitator.
That's really, I have found after many years, we've both been doing this for years, the real art of regression at the end of the day, apart from all the things we have discussed, the tuning in, the sensitivity, being able to stay present, asking questions in the right way, using language is the most important skill to develop, right? Because it can take this session in any and all directions. And how do you do that without you being not present, yet you guiding that whole process? So that is really where experience comes in and where training comes in. And that's really why, when we help you to become a facilitator, we will focus on some of these things, like how can we help you, work with the client? How can we, you being so tuned in and you being so empathetic, but yet you being away, and yet you are leading the session in a way without leading it.
Yeah.
So that is a skill.
Yeah, definitely.
That is a skill.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is a little bit what we like to share about past life regressions.
Yes. Yeah.
And we'll have more. We are having here a series of 5 videos about our training. When you're interested, please watch all 5. And there's some prerequisite information in there that we will not have the time to share with you during the training. So some of these important things, like the theory of mind, how does the unconscious work, we would like you to look at these things before joining our training, so that you have a lot of that information already there. And it will also give you a nice warm-up for the training, kind of seeing the way we teach and getting in tune and in alignment with our training. So we wish you well, and please keep watching and
like and subscribe.
Thank you.